You're listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. The best of Two for Tuesday, Volume 2.
About 13 years ago, I lived in an old terrace house in Highgate, Perth, across from Hyde Park. I loved it, and so did my son, who was little at the time. Odd things used to happen, like lamps would go out, and I would say, "Can you turn it back on, please?" And you guessed it, it would come back on. This happened lots of times, and we were used to it, and we actually thought it was quite sweet, like the house was alive. It never felt scary. Then, after about a year being there, stranger things started to occur. At one stage, all the pictures in the house would fall off the walls for no reason at all, and this lasted for about a week. I was telling a friend about it who was over during that week, and he was looking at me very skeptically, and I laughed and was about to try to convince him when the painting above us, which was behind the couch, fell off the wall on top of us. Luckily, it was an unframed canvas. One night when I was home alone, I went to go down the hallway to bed, and there was a wetness down the middle of the hall carpet that led to my bedroom. No one else had been in the house all day, and no water had been anywhere near the hall. I called my parents, who told me to look under the carpet as it might be rising damp. Even though it was summer, I checked. The floor below was totally dry. The next morning when I woke, the light pink couch in the lounge room had a huge round wet patch on it. I had been there myself all night, and I had not weed on the couch. The seat cushion was soaked through, with no visible explanation available at all. The next night I asked a girlfriend to stay as I was getting a bit nervous, and the novelty of it all was wearing off. She agreed, we had dinner and chatted, and then prepared for bed. I asked her to push the bolt up on the back door while I brushed my teeth, and she called out to me that it was jammed and wouldn't move. When I went out there, she was looking a bit odd. I pushed the bolt, and it went right into place effortlessly. She then said she was really sorry, but she had to go home. I thought she must be joking, but she wasn't. She mumbled excuses as she made her way to the door. Virtually running to her car, she called back to me and said, "You'll be fine, I promise." I was shocked. She was not normally that weird, and I found out eventually that when she went to bolt the door, the bolt would just not budge no matter how much force she used. Then she felt a painful ringing in her ears and sensed that someone was telling her to get out. She claimed that the feeling was so terrifying, she knew she had to leave. But she also claimed that she felt the ghost, spirit, energy, whatever it was being protective of me, and that I would be fine. The most dramatic thing that happened in the house, thankfully, occurred during the daytime. My partner and I were unpacking the shopping one fine Saturday afternoon and chatting while my son played, and there was a nice mood in the house. Then I realized I could hear the TV being turned on and off over and over, so I called out for my son to stop playing with it. He called back, "Mom, it's not me." The room was open plan, so I looked over into the lounge, and sure enough, my son was playing with his Game Boy. My partner had just started to explain that it was most likely an electrical fault, when the toaster behind us started popping up repeatedly, as in the toaster spring. He was just about to restate his faulty wiring theory when we both noticed that the toaster wasn't plugged in. As we stared at each other in amazement, the fridge started to literally shake from side to side, banging very loudly as it hit the ground each time. Then immediately when that stopped, the fly-wire door leading outside opened and slammed shut right before our eyes. We all just looked at each other in astonishment until my son said, "Cool." That made us all laugh about it. I guess that sounds odd, but it wasn't scary, just amazing. A friend who was worried about me living there took me to see a psychic, and I mentioned nothing to him about why I was there. And the first thing he said to me was, "You've got a spirit living in your house that's very active, and he has his eye on you." Naturally, that didn't impress me at all, but it freaked me out, and I thought of my ghost as being female. Somehow that was less scary. He also told me that the ghost was very jealous of anyone close to me, and said that he watched me getting undressed every night. At that point, I stopped the reading. I thought that was an off thing to tell me, even if it was true. When I moved into a new house, 2 other friends came to tell me about experiences that they had felt in my old place, but had never wanted to scare me by telling me while I was still living there. Both stories were told to me by 2 people who didn't know each other, and what happened to them had happened at separate times, so there was no collusion. They told me that they had felt a painful ringing in their ears and felt very frightened. They felt like something definitely wanted them out of the house, and both said the ringing didn't stop until they were quite some distance from my home. Another friend confided in me that she had clearly heard a voice saying, "Get out." When she looked around, no one was there, and I was still outside hanging out the wash. I moved out of that house a long time ago, and I've had many more fascinating things happen, but none as visually dramatic as the TV toaster fridge thing. I just think of it all as being a natural occurrence. I believe in parallel levels of existence, and that people move on, not die. Just sometimes people choose not to move on completely, and some of them apparently still have a few issues. This story is hard to explain, but nevertheless true. I live in Australia on a farm, and I'm 18 now, but this story happened about 2 years ago when I was 16. A friend had come over to my place, but left, and I was all alone, and it was just me and my 2 dogs, going on around 5 or 5:30. I was just chilling, watching TV and playing games, but I got super bored like I always do after playing them for a couple of hours. My parents were out, my younger brother was at a friend's place, and my nan, who lives next to us in a little granny flat, she was out too, getting her hair cut. There aren't too many places good close to where I live, so you have to walk quite some distance before going on a half-decent walking track that you would actually be able to enjoy. Stupid me. I thought, well, I'm bored. I went for a walk, only before it got dark in about 2 hours. Skip ahead like a half hour of walking. I finally hit a trail that I like to walk to clear my head, and it was a trail that has 2 ways to go, one to a river that has a few large rocks you can sit on and just watch the river flow, and another way which leads to another spot on the river. I went down the first track and sat on these rocks looking at my iPhone while watching the river as well. I was there for maybe 10 or 20 minutes, and then I decided to head back. As I was going back up the track, I saw a bag on the ground, and I was super curious because that wasn't there when I went down. Anyway, I went over to it to check it out, and I heard something behind me, like something was coming from behind, and I gotta admit, I freaked out and started running as hard as I could, and I'm actually quite fit, so I can sprint quite some distance. I finally reached the start of the track, and noticed it was getting darker and darker. And that's when I checked my phone and realized I only had half an hour to go before I got home, before I knew I would be in trouble. I know this area very well, so I know all the shortcuts. And while I was at the start of the trail, just catching my breath, I looked behind me, and this man, a little shorter than me and quite tubbier, came up behind me, and he said that he would give me money and a new iPhone if I came with him. I replied, "I'm good, thanks, maybe another time." But he said, "Come on, it's all for free." Before I could talk again, he said, "Hey, what's a good-looking fella like you doing out here by yourself?" And I just said, "Going for a walk?" He reached into his bag and pulled out what looked like something you would hold a stray dog down so you could detain them, and I freaked the fuck out and ran harder than I ever had before. I could hear him chasing me, saying, "Wait, wait!" And I said, "Fuck off, you creep." I finally got home and it was super dark. I actually had to use my phone's torch to make it the rest of the way home, and when I went inside, I told my dad everything, and he said, "You're okay. You're probably imagining things," and then he told me to go to my room and calm down, and hey, you should have been home a half hour ago. So I went to my room and slept the rest of the night. I've always been the first one to wake up in the morning, and I like to go outside and take a piss in the paddock while taking a look around, even though it gets super cold. I didn't mind because I was kind of used to that. So I got to the front gate, and the lock, which is usually on, was snapped off. I ran back to the house and told my dad, and he grabbed his shotgun, and we went around the property looking for things, but we found nothing, and he said, "Yeah, that is kind of strange, but it could be some of the teenagers around just being dicks." As we headed back to the house, I said to him, "Hey, look, over there in the bush, beside the gate." The man that I saw the day before was hiding there, and he was there the entire time, especially when I was at the gate, and he could have grabbed me. My parents would never have known. Dad ran towards the front gate with the gun, but by then the guy had jumped into his car and driven off. So Dad took a potshot at the car and took out its back window. We called the police and told them everything, and Dad asked if he was going to be in trouble. The policeman said no worries, as it was classed as self-defense and a breach of property protection. But what creeps me out is the police had found a dog tranquilizer syringe right where this guy had been standing in the bushes. They caught this guy a year later due to an investigation, but it scares me if he had got any kids and what he had done to them. P.S. I have a knife now to protect me. Recently, a friend and I began talking about hauntings. I hadn't known him for very long, but as we were getting to know each other, we talked about whether we believed in ghosts. Since I work in a haunted location, that's another story, I told him that I did, and he told me about the house that he lives in. And of course, I had to have a look for myself, particularly as an amateur paranormal investigator. To start with, he told me that an elderly relative of his who owned the house and passed away in it from natural causes remains in the house. She doesn't like it when people leave lights on or appliances on and will often turn them off if they are left unattended. She is generally quite good-natured, but if someone unfamiliar to her doesn't follow her house rules, she's been known to show her displeasure. For example, she absolutely hated people smoking in the house, especially as she was a non-smoker herself. Should anyone smoke within the walls of the house, she tended to do things like hide their lighters or cigarette packs from them. They would then be found in really strange locations, like in the bathroom sink or in front of the back door, almost as though she was trying to hint towards shooing someone out the door. She would occasionally call out, usually during the night, and normally a greeting, like a hello. As long as someone she was familiar with was in the house, she was generally known to be a happy presence. When it's only people who are strangers to her, she appears to try and ward them off, but aggressively turning lights on and off, rattling doors and windows, that kind of thing. She was such a strong woman when she was alive, it would appear as though her strength kept the original spirits in the house at bay. She would talk to them in her native tongue, which was French. When necessary, she would occasionally raise her voice and almost sound like she was warning them off. As my friend doesn't actually speak French himself, he couldn't really tell what she was saying, except sometimes when she would swear at them. As her health began to deteriorate, it would appear as though the spirits in the house would then gain some strength, and she wasn't able to control them quite so much. My friend told me that once she had passed away, the spirit activity increased significantly. He's not sure if it was initially her spirit or those of the original inhabitants of the house. It isn't known exactly who the other spirits in the house are, only that they don't appear to appreciate people being in their space. One night, my friend awoke and found 4 human figures standing around his bed. Frightened, he closed his eyes, but opened them back up. But the spirits were still there. They didn't move. They didn't speak. But he got the feeling that they were very aware of him and were trying to intimidate him. The original idea behind their existence in the house was because when his relative bought the house, a certain area underneath the floorboards had been dug up and re-cemented. His relative would often joke that maybe somebody buried a body down there. But despite extensive searches, no origin story for these spirits has ever been conclusively proven. The spirit's main target lately seemed to be his new housemate, and he would often wake to the sensation of someone sitting down on the edge of his bed, and then a freezing cold chill in the room. He would hear someone talking out in the kitchen, down the other end of the house, and then calling out in an aggressive tone, as though they were mad, and he would only hear this when he was home alone. Both my friend and his housemate hear the sounds of something being dragged down the hallway, and heavy footsteps thumping towards their rooms all the time. It doesn't seem to matter whether there is only one or both of them at home. It happens at random a lot of the time. Sometimes several nights in a row, and sometimes it hasn't happened for a month. The dragging sound also occurs outside the bedroom windows, as though someone is dragging a heavy bag of something through the backyard. My friend has a nephew who also stays at the house sometimes, and his nephew has reported to him that sometimes objects will be moved in front of him, like the television remote control and his glasses. He says that sometimes they try to talk to him, although he has never said exactly what they've whispered, only that it scares him and he doesn't want to talk to them. He says that sometimes he sees a man standing in the hallway. It doesn't appear to move or react to being seen. This man just stands there until the nephew looks away, and then he's no longer there once he looks back. So, based on what my friend told me and my love and experience with the paranormal, I asked him if I could stay over for a night or two with some equipment and do a little investigating. He agreed, and before I knew it, there I was, standing in his lounge room, holding a tape recorder and asking questions. I began with asking who was in the house and why they were there. Almost immediately, I had a voice come through saying the name John. There was little in the way of further communication using this method. The only exception was when I asked why they liked to sit down on the end of the housemate's bed in the middle of the night, and the housemate's name was repeated twice. So I decided to change my investigation a little and tried baiting them by reenacting an event that both occupants of the house told me often triggers activity: having a shower. It had been mentioned to me by both of them that they would be having a shower, and as they opened their eyes after rinsing off their face, they would see a dark figure on the other side of the shower screen. While this wasn't really something I wanted to experience, I wanted proof for myself that the house was haunted, even if it wasn't proof I could hold in my hand. So I undressed and ran the shower. After climbing in and beginning to wash, I got the distinct feeling that I was being watched. As my friend had left the house to collect dinner, I knew it wasn't him. I thought perhaps it was just my nerves getting the better of me, so I continued with the shower. I rinsed my hair and was about to turn off the water and get out, when I heard a very quiet but definite sound of the handle on the door of the bathroom creaking, as though someone was opening the door. I opened my eyes and looked through the screen towards the door and saw a flash of darkness, almost like a shadow running through the room. It was enough that it temporarily blocked out the whiteness of the towel that was hanging on the back of the door. I quickly got out of the shower, stepped out in a hurry to get dry. As I did so, I heard my friend arrive home and call out. After I dried and dressed, I went out to greet him, and he said that he thought he saw a man standing in the window as he pulled into the driveway, and wanted to know if his housemate had returned home. We thoroughly checked the house, then called the housemate. He was at a movie at the time, so we were sure it hadn't been him. Fast forward to later that evening. I was resting on the couch with my eyes closed, nervously trying to sleep. There was a dim light in the room as the kitchen light had been deliberately left on, as I was anxious about sleeping in the house in complete darkness. I managed to doze off after an hour or so. I kept stirring. My sleep was restless, and I finally managed to fall asleep properly. I woke up around 4:20 a.m., woken by the sound of someone calling out in distress. As I opened my eyes, I saw the figure of a man standing in the hallway, looking at me. He didn't move. He didn't say anything, but I could hear the sound of someone breathing heavily, as though they were enraged by something. I sat straight up and couldn't take my eyes off of the figure in the hallway. I began to shake as I was scared, and I decided to call out to my friend and see if he was awake. As I called out to him, he turned on his bedroom light, which was down the other end of the hallway where I had seen the figure. The figure disappeared as soon as I turned the light on, and my friend came out into the hallway to check on me. I decided I wasn't going to be able to sleep anymore, and I figured I might as well leave, as I was quite shaken by the incident. As much as I had expected something paranormal to happen, I didn't expect to feel threatened or endangered as I had. As I was packing up my things and getting ready to go, my friend and I were talking about what I had seen and heard. We both heard the sound of someone chuckling quickly, as though they had delighted in scaring me. I left the house in a hurry. My friend continues to live there for now. I haven't returned, and I vowed that I won't. I am clearly not wanted in that house on Bindery Crescent, Ingle Farm. This happened over 10 years ago now, so let me set the stage. At the time, I was in middle school and lived in the suburbs of SoCal, so crime wasn't something to worry about. So safe that our parents let us have the whole come home when the streetlights turn on rule that many households had. We also lived right next to a bunch of canyons, which were just fragmented patches of undeveloped land that had tons of brush and bushes in them, that acted as our place to explore and make forts in and whatnot. It was the weekend, and my brother and I had been playing a ton of Borderlands at the time, and my mom wanted us the hell out of the house, so she made us go for a run around the Loop. The Loop was basically just this path to run when you wanted to get a good 2 or 3 miles in while also doing some hills. It all encompassed part of our neighborhood, creating a sort of loop. We groaned, said fine, and put on our running gear. The beginning of the run was fine, just chatting and goofing off while walking every once in a while since we weren't super stoked about heading up a huge hill. At the top of this hill, the street bends and then connects with a more main road, so there's typically more traffic. As we were going, I saw a white truck turn down the street ahead of us. The same street that we were about to also turn onto to keep doing the loop. Of course, I think nothing of it at the time. It's not until later that I see another white truck past us, and I get a kind of glitch in the matrix like deja vu. After the next 2 times a white truck passes, I realize it's not a bunch of trucks, just the one. The same one that turned off the main road to ours before. I think it's weird, but I figure maybe they're lost or just driving around looking at houses, which wasn't uncommon considering it was a pretty nice area. But as we keep going, I notice that there's a white truck parked on the side of the road, and then it clicks. This truck has been driving past us, parking on the side of the road, waiting for us to pass while hiding in plain sight, and then driving farther down the road out of sight before parking again. By now, I still had some doubt that this truck was actually following us, so I waited until we passed it to see if it would follow us again. We were at the bottom of the loop at this point, with canyon on our left and right. The one to our right was a state park with biking trails and hiking paths, but much more expansive and separated from houses. My brother and I hadn't explored that one, but we knew the canyons on our left like the back of our hand. We had spent countless days and weekends exploring them, making forts, carving labyrinth-like paths through them, so we felt very comfortable there. It was our home away from home, and we felt like we could evade any pursuer in those twisting trails of bushes and rocks. At this point, I heard a car coming up from behind us, and I waited until it was just about to pass us to look at it. I turn, confirm that it's the white truck, and get a good look at 2 middle-aged men in the front seat. They were white, one with black hair with a beard and one with gray hair and stubble, and they were staring directly at us as they passed. At this point, without breaking eye contact with the truck and watching it go past us down the road, I tell my brother, "That white truck's following us. Once it goes around the bend, we are cutting through the canyon to go home." He agreed, and the moment the truck was out of view, we bolted into the canyon and booked it back to our house, where we told our mom what had happened, and she called the police. The police showed up and asked us for a description, and told us that going into the canyon was, number one, the worst thing to do, as we had no way of knowing how capable the men could have been on foot, and two, we should have just knocked on any random house's door to get help. We didn't know any better. Soon, there was a helicopter going all over the neighborhood looking for a truck that matched our description. They didn't catch anyone since the description was so broad. They also told us not to worry about it in the future, since the helicopter and the fact that we got away from them should have scared them off, and they would likely go someplace else. But still, spooky as hell. We never saw them again, but had plenty of other weirdos follow us around in the canyon and the like. But to the two guys following around middle school boys in your weird truck, let's not meet. This is something that happened to me just a couple of months ago. I love Facebook. I love memes. I love talking to new people, and I love long comment sections. That being said, I never give away personal information such as where I work or live, my birthday info is private, and so on. I've made quite a few friends that I don't know personally, but agree with or have had really good conversations with. So, after commenting back and forth on a friend's post for a while, it was no surprise to me when Tyler messaged me. It started off fairly simple. We just talked about the post we commented on, and how are you doing, and common interests. I was excited to have a new friend, and he seemed pretty interesting, because we did have a lot in common. I'm not a beauty queen or anything, but I let him know after about an hour of casual conversation that I was happily taken. I enjoyed his friendship, but it wouldn't lead to anything more since I'm going to get married next year. He seemed a little upset, but he was still respectful, so great. I told him goodnight and went to sleep and thought nothing of it. The conversation continued for a few days, and he started to get a little pushy if I didn't respond immediately. And I told him that I was very busy, so I might not always answer right away. Then he apologized and told me that he was just bored and lonely. I started to put a little distance between us because he didn't really back down. But I didn't want to completely give up my new friendship because I hated the fact that he was so lonely. One day, he randomly messaged me saying that he wanted to have me in his arms. I immediately nipped that in the bud, reminding him of my relationship and telling him that if he didn't stop, then our friendship would be done because I respect and am loyal to my fiancée above anyone else. He immediately lost his shit, messaging me saying he didn't care about my fiancé and making threats towards him, etc. I stopped messaging and selected to put his messages on ignore. He could still message me, but it wouldn't go to my inbox. I made a post about it, and a friend of mine commented and said he had done the same thing to her, except he knew where she lived and would show up outside her house. I freaked out and went to see if there were any more messages from him, because she told me he was bad news, and I should call the police if any threats were being made. This is where the shitstorm really begins. He had messaged me over a dozen times. Different things. Started off kind of taunting me for not answering, then moved on to him messaging me about some asshole who cut him off or was driving too slow for his tastes. Then to him saying he was going to shoot the guy and it would be my fault because I made him so angry by ignoring him. I messaged him back telling him to leave me the hell alone and stop replying for a while. He started messaging me, narrowing down on where I lived. That really freaked me out, as I had never told him where I lived, or anything even remotely close to my house. The only thing I had ever said was that I'd talk to him later because I was going to Arby's to get some food and my phone was dying. Yet he somehow knew I was 7 minutes from the Arby's by my house, which is exactly how long it takes to walk there for me, and there are several Arby's in my city. Then he started narrowing down to what street I lived off of, down to knowing a 4-door black sedan was linked to my address, which there was, but not in my name. It was in my sister's name when she registered it as an Uber. That was enough for me, and I called the police on the non-emergency line. The police refused to do anything, of course. They said that until he actually showed up or did something, there was nothing they could do. Never mind that he was sending me pictures of dead people and saying that he was going to be my family and was narrowing down my address. Unless he actually showed up, I was screwed. All I could do was apply for a protective order, so I did. Tyler kept messaging me, so I told him there was a PO in place and he needed to leave me alone. He responded with there was nothing that could be done until he was served and he signed it, which is true. My fiancée is in IT and has a cousin who is pretty tech-savvy as well, and we managed to get the last couple of addresses Tyler had, but the police couldn't find him at either of those. We had license plate numbers, address, full name, birthday, etc., yet he seemed untraceable. We stopped for a while, but the day of my court case to have the PO extended to 2 years, he started again. My fiancé filed criminal charges for the last threat he made, when he wrote, "Someone could come shoot you in 15 minutes." His last known address was exactly a 15-minute drive from my house. I've spent the last couple of months completely afraid. He was arrested and served finally, and I think he was speeding or something. And it turns out he has a history of this. Multiple charges, all dropped or dismissed. He's done it to a couple of my friends who showed up to my court case for the criminal charges. They dropped everything from felonies to a simple misdemeanor disorderly conduct charge, with 12 months suspended jail time depending on his behavior, because they, quote, couldn't prove it was him and not someone else behind the keyboard. It didn't help that I had never seen his face before this court date, even though I had 2 people who had received messages from him and seen him face to face as well. I can't sleep. The slightest noise wakes me up panicking, and it's been hell for my family. So Tyler, let's not meet. This happened about 10 years ago in Calgary, Alberta. I was 14 or 15 at the time and working the night shift with my mom delivering papers. I was having a lot of unexplainable things happen to me. One place we delivered to was beside an old park that no one played at anymore, and I always saw a little girl on the swing. The first time I saw her, I was really concerned. She looked no more than 4 or 5, and this was at about 2 in the morning. I told my mom, but she said no one was there. But just to make sure, my mom had me stay in the van, and she went to walk through the park. She came back and said she saw no one. Fast forward about a month or so. I'd gotten very used to seeing this girl, sometimes on the swing, sometimes walking around. I wanted to know who she was, so I did a little research on the area and came up with nothing. At first she gave off that innocent, lost girl vibe, so I thought maybe she was a missing kid who met a tragic end. A little more research, this time missing or murdered children from the whole city and the towns around it. But again, I came up with nothing. Slowly, I started feeling uneasy when I saw her. She no longer felt like a child. She felt old, and something was definitely not right. I started getting bad headaches every time I saw her. I started getting sick and very weak as well, and at one point I was so weak and dizzy, I couldn't stand on my own for almost 2 days. My mom, who was not religious at all, started to get very worried and called a church asking for help. They suggested that we pray and ask God for guidance. In all likelihood, they thought I was a troubled kid making stuff up. Well, that didn't do anything, and things got worse. One night, my headache was so bad, and I told my mom she had to take me home. I couldn't see it hurt so bad, and at the time, we lived about a 5-minute drive from the park. So she drove me home, and my brother went to work with her. My sister stayed up to take care of me, a nice cold cloth on my forehead, and she made sure it was dark and quiet, and I finally passed out on the couch, and my sister went upstairs to bed. Dream time. What felt like only a few seconds after I fell asleep, I heard a blood-curdling scream come from my sister's room. I opened my eyes, and all the lights were on, but I didn't care. Screw the headache. I booked it upstairs to my sister's room. Only I wasn't in my sister's room. I was in the van, at the park. Confused, I looked around and saw my sister standing about 10 feet in front of the car. It started pouring rain, so I yelled at her to get inside the van. She came to the passenger side, and she wasn't my sister anymore. She was the little girl on the swing. She smiled, looked me dead in the eyes, and the most evil, sing-songy voice I'd ever heard said, "I found you." And she started giggling. My eyes shot open. I was back on my couch, and the lights were on, so I figured I'd been out for a while. I tried to get up for a drink of water, and I couldn't move. I was in a form of sleep paralysis, and I thought I could hear that evil giggle again. And I started freaking out, trying with all my might to move, to yell, to do anything. About 30 seconds later, which felt a whole lot longer, trust me, my mom came rushing in the door, and I could finally move again. I rolled off the couch and screamed and cried. My mom said that ever since she dropped me off, she had a bad feeling and just needed to make sure that I was okay. It had only been about 20 minutes since she dropped me off. I told her about my vivid dream, and now my mom was convinced something seriously bad was happening. She called one of our good friends who was a Wiccan to see if they could give us some help. I'll call her Jay. Jay said it sounded like something demonic, but not necessarily a demon. She said she would be over within a week, and she lived about a 12-hour drive away. The next night, I was working with my mom again, feeling like crap, but I was too scared to ask to go home again. I'd much rather sleep in the van, which is exactly what I did. Now what happened next, I have no recollection of. My mom said she let me sleep, and she got out, and when she came back, I was sitting up, smiling at her. She asked me why, and I started to giggle. She told me to stop because it wasn't funny, and she said I did stop, and I looked at her, tilted my head, and smiled and said, "I found her. She's mine now." And then I started giggling again. Mom freaked out and started yelling my name, and finally I came to and asked her why she was yelling at me. I got another headache, and Mom called Jay and told her what had happened. She hopped on the next flight over, just called into work. Originally she was going to finish the work week and then drive over on the weekend. Jay did a blessing and smudged our house and my room. She prayed to her goddesses for protection. She did everything she could think of to protect me. I don't know what it was, but something worked. I haven't seen or heard this little girl since, and I'm very happy about that. To this day, I still don't know exactly what she was. A demon, a ghost, or some other evil spirit. My name is Rose, and I'm in high school. The first experience happened when I was 5. I had just moved into a new house in a part of Indiana that I hadn't lived in for most of my life. It was a move that I did not want, as I was leaving my friends behind. When I was a kid, I would always take a bath with the door open, so I didn't feel alone. My mom would have me bathe upstairs while she was downstairs with my dad watching TV. Sometimes when I was in the bath, a shadow man with a fedora would slowly glide past the door, and I would always get this feeling of dread and be terrified. And this happened every day in broad daylight, mind you. I don't remember when it started happening. I just remember being 5 and noticing it. When I told my mom, she said I was just seeing floaters, and eyes do that. She said they usually just look like circles and are small, but mine could be different. And this went on for a little while, until I was so scared of being terrified all the time and complained to both my parents again. My dad said, "Well, why don't you try drawing what you're seeing?" And when I drew the picture of the black shadow in a trench coat and fedora, they started closing my door when I would bathe, and everything was quiet for a while. Then, some years later when I was 12, about to be 13, I was laying in my bed, in the dark, with the door cracked, and I saw a shadow sprint by. Normally I was afraid of the dark, and I still kind of am, and I slept with my lights on, but I wanted to get over it. My mom was up working, so at first I just thought it was her. But then I realized there was no reason for her to be running, and she can't run that fast. Although I didn't know what I had seen, I was sure it was not my mom at that point. I was very tired and I felt no real fear, so I just went to sleep. I thought nothing of it, but the next day my mom got a panic attack. It had been triggered by her seeing a shadow figure sprint down the hallway while she was in her bedroom. She called my name thinking it was me, but I was still downstairs watching Pretty Little Liars. My dad was outside cutting the grass, and we have a dog that would have gone crazy if there was a burglar or a thief in the house. Knowing all this, she went into a panic attack, and I talked to her about it after she had calmed down, which is how I found out what had triggered her. She also said she had seen something run down the hallway the night before, but assumed it was me, and again called my name, but I didn't respond. She thought nothing of it the night before, and this made me remember what had happened when I was 5. She got out a book of prayers and said them loudly upstairs with me while we were blessing the house. Fast forward to now. I'm in high school, and some things are happening again. Neither my mom nor I have seen any shadow figures again, but I heard a muffled scream while sitting in my parents' room the other day, and my mom heard a muffled cry coming from the same place, their closet, a day or two later. Only a few more incidents have happened between 7th grade and where I am now, but they are small paranormal incidents, and this story is long enough. Funny enough, all the things happening now have my mom totally freaked, whereas I try not to pay any mind to them. I suppose the roles have reversed since I was a kid. I wanted to share this story, and if anyone could give me some insight into what's going on, it would be appreciated. My mom feels as they are demons, and I think they're nothing more than a residential haunting. I would love to hear what you guys think. This happened to me about 20 years ago. I was around 18, and a girl I knew in college introduced me to the Ouija board one night. It was your store-bought Parker Brothers version, and we played with it, and it wasn't that weird because everyone was suspicious of each other about who was moving the planchette. Just a toy, I thought, but interesting in the least. Maybe even a little spooky. I did a little reading and found out that if you make your own, it's more powerful. There's a better connection to the spirit world, blah blah blah. I wasn't taking any of this seriously, but I was excited by the creep factor and how many other people did take it seriously. So one night in October, a couple of weeks before Halloween, I called an old girlfriend, Jenny, and we got to talking. We had been reduced to good friends at this time. She was dating some other guy named Patrick, and I had other girls on my mind. We were both a bit bored, so I invited her over, and I was living in the apartment above my parents' garage. It wasn't much, but it was my own place. I told her about my newfound knowledge and said I'd make a Ouija board to keep us entertained. She was reluctant, but I assured her it was just a toy, and Parker Brothers makes these things. Nothing to worry about. It can't hurt you. It'll be fun, I said. She lived about 20 miles away, so I had some time to get things ready. The board was easy enough to make, just a piece of 18-inch by 24-inch drywall, and I drew the letters and symbols on it with a Sharpie. To make the planchette, I cut a corner off a pine board and drilled a hole in the middle. Voila! We had a board, and we were ready to contact Elvis. A couple of things I told her that I read about these things, from the box in the store or a movie, I don't know. But I said, don't take your hands off the board once you've started. If you do, you could open a door. And don't stop the session without saying goodbye. If you do, again, you could open a door. And finally, spirits lie. Can't spell, don't use it alone, and don't burn it near your house. Now, on to the fun stuff. We sat down across from each other with this thing on our knees. I don't remember the name of the first spirit we got from the afterlife, but we asked it the usual questions. Are you dead? It answered yes. Can you see us? Yes. I just tossed a thesaurus over my shoulder. It landed open. What page is it open to? 1, 3, 4 were spelled out. I got up and checked the book. The Ouija spirit was correct. "Where are you?" I asked. H-E-L-L. "Oh, really? Is there anyone else there we know?" "Yes." "Who is there that we know?" U-N-C-L-E. At this point, Jenny stopped and got a little weirded out. Turns out she had an uncle who committed suicide, and I found that out that night. One of those family secrets. We put the board down and I reassured her that, hey, it's just a toy, and it's our subconscious minds moving this thing around. So we took a break and smoked a cig or two, and then we decided to try again. This time we got some other spirit, also in hell, and I asked, "Is there anyone there I know?" "Yes." "Who is it?" D-A-R-R-E-N. This is the older brother I had lost 4 years earlier in an accident. I got a little miffed at this thing, because my brother was a teenager and a good kid before he passed, and he was kind of a hero of sorts to me, and there was no way in my mind he would be in hell. I pressed on because this thing was bullshit to me at this point. "Oh, really? Well then, if he's there, I want to talk to him. Is he there?" "Yes." "Okay, Darren, you and I shared a room when I was in the 6th grade and you were in the 7th. You were in love with a girl and wrote her name on the wall behind your bed, and only I knew it was there. What was the name you wrote?" K-A-R-A. I dropped the board. Nobody but me and Darren knew that, and he never dated her, so it wasn't public knowledge. She was kind of his dream girl, and he passed on before anything ever developed. Jenny was a little concerned at this point, and once again I tell her that it's just a stupid toy, and my subconscious mind is playing tricks on us. So we took another break, had another cigarette or two, and decided to give it another shot. We get the third spirit. "Who are you?" S-A-T-A. Oh shit, I panicked and dropped the board. Santa Claus doesn't spell his name that way, kids. Okay, break time. Jenny is really rattled at this point and says, "I don't want to play with this toy anymore." So I agreed, and we decided to say goodbye to the spirits or whatever and be done with it. We decide that this is going to be the last communication no matter who we get. So I say, "Who are you?" S-A-T-A, and I'm cringing at this point, R. Satyr? "Well, Satyr, we've got to go now, so goodbye." "No. No, we need to go. Goodbye." "No. Y-O-U-R. What is Y-O-U-R? U-R-W-R-O-N-G. Who is wrong? J-E-N-N-Y. To be honest, I was glad it wasn't talking to me. What is Jenny wrong about? U-R-W-R-O-N-G. Now we're irritated and creeped out, and practically shouting at this thing. What is she wrong about? Again, you are wrong. About what? T-O-Y-S. It took a split second for that to grab me, and then it did. You know that rush of adrenaline you get when you have a close call? The way it rushes up your spine like a wave and it hits you in the back? This felt like a tidal wave to me. I mean, I freaked out. The board went flying. I grabbed Jenny by the arm, and it took me about 3 steps to get out the door that was 15 feet away. We dashed down the stairs and into the house, 50 feet away, and she was crying at this point, and I was rattled. I felt like the devil himself was standing behind me. We spent at least an hour in the house trying to calm down and trying to figure out what to do. I mean, that was my apartment, but I wasn't going up there alone, and that board had to go. Finally, armed with a shotgun, I know, not much good against Satan, but I felt better with it, we sent the dog into the apartment first while we waited on the stairs. After a few minutes, I went in. Jenny waited in the doorway. She was not going back in there, considering the door we may have opened. While I ran in, grabbed the board and the planchette. We drove 15 miles away and dropped the planchette into a dumpster, and 15 more miles before I dropped the board in another dumpster. Both of us were still shaking. I never slept in that apartment again and won't go up there after dark, to this day. My biggest fear when I'm visiting my parents' home is that I'll move something in the garage or barn, and behind it will be that board. For privacy reasons, I'm going to change all names and shift some ages around and relationships. Other than that, this story is completely and utterly true. I was adopted when I was 4 years old, and although my parents were, and still are to this day, caring, they had expectations of me as their child that I could not possibly reach. Because of this, they tended to verbally and emotionally abuse me. My one safe place in my new family, since they started fostering to adopt me, was my grandmother on my new mother's side. She, through her ethnicity and family, believed heavily in magic when it came to the mind and spirit. She taught me from the moment that I was adopted to read palms, tea leaves, tarot cards, and to meditate. She also taught me the importance of dreams and empathy. She always claimed that I was a strong empath. I knew things about people rather easily, things that could never just be figured out with reading body language. I never told anyone about these sessions or my strange gifts, mostly because I didn't realize that people found them interesting. I just assumed that it was a personality trait that people could have, at least until 4th grade, when I was 10 years old. I had gained some friends after transferring schools, and during a sleepover one night, I told my best friend Riley that her mother was going to have a baby. She had been worrying that her mother was pregnant again, and as she was one of the older of 6 kids, she knew the signs. But she never once discussed it with me. I wasn't even told that she had that many siblings. Sure enough, a week later, her mother announced that they were expecting child number 7. Riley told everyone in our grade that I had some freakishly psychic powers, and suddenly everyone wanted me to predict their futures. Obviously, my gifts do not work like that. I'm not Phoebe from Charmed, where I can touch someone and just see their future. However, being a child that struggled a lot with neglect and emotional abuse, I thrived in the attention that it got me, and I started reading people's palms for fun. Around this time, my parents were frequently leaving me alone at home to go on vacations or to nice dinners, and they would leave me with a babysitter named Maggie when my grandmother was unable to look after me. Maggie was amazing and soon became a girl I could look up to. She was 18 years old and had a first cousin, Charlie, that was in the 7th grade at my school. Although her cousin was 3 years older than me, she rode my bus since she lived only about 5 blocks away. I wanted to like Charlie like I liked Maggie, but she tended to bully me on the bus and make fun of how I had hairy legs and didn't shave yet like she did. She also teased me for being so young and flat-chested, even though I was only 10 years old. Anyway, me revealing that I was a palm reader and such only gave her more ammunition to bully me with, and one day she sat uncomfortably close and egged me on to read her palm or to tell her her future. She had been nagging me to do it for a while, so eventually I gave in, telling myself that this would be the perfect time to scare her and get even. When I read her palm, I had this idea in my mind of what I was going to tell her, that she was going to get hurt or that some ghost was haunting her. However, when I opened my mouth to say something of that sort, I suddenly blurted out something entirely different. You will die before you turn 18, and when you die, you will kill 2 people. Of course, she just burst out laughing, because who can kill someone when they die? Charlie obviously knew that I was just trying to freak her out. I shook it off, thinking nothing of the strange half-threat that I had blurted out, assuming that I just didn't think before I spoke. I could not have been more wrong. Fast forward to when I was a freshman in high school, and I completely forgot of that day. In fact, I'd nearly forgotten about my favorite babysitter, Maggie. She had moved away to college in a different state, and Charlie had gone to a different high school than I ended up going to. One night, when I was nearly 15 years old, my mother came into the living room, and she looked like she had been crying. During this time, my parents were getting divorced, so I assumed that she had been drinking, which was usually when she started crying. I stood up, ready to take the parenting role and put her to bed, but she had the house phone in her hand and said, "Honey, you need to sit down for this." She didn't slur her words at all. I immediately stiffened and lowered onto the couch, keeping on the edge, wondering immediately if something happened to Grandma or my father, who had moved out several months ago. She told me then that there had been a horrible car crash. 4 drunk girls got into a car and decided to have a joyride around some train tracks that were not too far from here. The train didn't hit them or anything, but there was a hill leading up to the tracks, and then to the left a ditch. Many cars had slid or tipped into that ditch if they drove too fast over the hill and tracks without turning their cars slightly to the right to avoid it. Apparently, they had taken to jumping the tracks by using the hill like a ramp with the radio blasting, but they ended up flipping down the ditch, and 3 of the 4 passengers died instantly. The 4th survived against all odds. The driver? Charlie, age 17, with her 18th birthday that next week. The survivor? My childhood babysitter, Maggie. Maggie ended up telling the story of what happened, since she was only a bit tipsy and soon came to remember that night just before the crash. Charlie had hit her head on one of the jumps and was feeling dizzy when they went to do another jump, so they decided to just go over the hill and continue towards the hospital, worrying that she had alcohol poisoning or a concussion. The last thing that Maggie remembers is Charlie starting to seize in the front seat, her foot hitting the gas hard towards the tracks. The rest was gone. She had possibly died before the car crashed, maybe even causing the crash, as if killing the 2 other girls in the car while dead. Since then, I have been very reluctant to use my abilities, as this is not the only death I have predicted. My husband's grandmother died a while back, and I was required to attend the funeral. There was no getting out of this one to prep the after dinner and basically avoid the whole not good with the dead people thing I have going on. I did not like my husband's grandmother. I respected her for what she did for my husband Jerry, and for the strength it took to raise 6 kids after her husband took off on her. But she was bigoted, prejudiced, and just plain mean in the way only an old lady could be. She also felt it was okay to hit my kids if she didn't like what they were doing or saying. I didn't then, and I don't now, ascribe to that school of thought. I could or would give a spanking if they did something dangerous, because a little pain versus a lot of pain or death was of course acceptable. Smacking my 6-year-old across the mouth hard enough to cut her lip because she dared to say no? Yeah, that was unacceptable to me, and I made very sure she knew that. And that to call people of color or diverse ethnic or religious backgrounds bigoted names would ensure she would not see my kids for weeks. Suffice to say, we did not get along while she was alive. We tolerate each other now that she's dead. Her death was fast, but not unexpected or sudden. We knew for a couple of weeks that she was going. The next part of this is hard to write, but please bear with me. While she was dying, and I mean that literally, in the last hours of her life, I stopped by to check on her house and grab a few things that my mother-in-law, who was by my mother's side at the hospital, needed. I was shocked to find that my aunt-in-law and her 2 daughters were at the house, going through her things. My mother-in-law lived there, It was and is her home, and Viola and her 2 girls were tearing through the house like it was a fire sale. They were grabbing stuff and putting it in large bags. My mother-in-law's coats, shoes, pictures off the wall, the computer I gave them for Christmas. I was completely shocked and said, "What the hell?" Vi said, "Oh, you need to get out of here. Mom hates you and I don't want you in my house." I replied, "I think this house belongs to Mary, not you. She's been paying the taxes and mortgage on it for 20 years. You need to put that stuff down and get out or I'm calling the cops. Mom said I could have anything I wanted, and my girls are helping me." Vi, Fern can't give you what isn't hers. Besides, she's been in a coma since before you got here. When could she have told you anything? Get out or I'm calling the cops. They finally left after calling me a few choice names. I got the stuff Mary needed and went to drop it off at the hospital. I stayed by my hubby's side for the next few hours until Fern passed. They went back to Mary's house to find it completely ransacked, everything gone, including the antique 1890s front door. Since neither Vi nor her daughters showed up at the hospital, I knew exactly what had happened. They waited for me to leave and came back. When I said that and said what had happened earlier, they didn't really call me a liar, but they made their disbelief known. I just shrugged and went home. Vi showed up at our house that night, drunk as a skunk and screaming at my house. I didn't open the door or acknowledge her except to say, "Leave, or I'm calling the cops." Later I found out that she had showed up at the house and when confronted said that she hadn't done it, but her daughter April was there wearing one of Mary's sweaters, one that I got her for Mother's Day from a specialty boutique in Key West that was handmade and an original. When Mary recognized it, she called Vi on it, and they just took off and disappeared. They did show up at the service and left before anyone could speak to them. Jerry spent the 3 days before the funeral replacing the door and appliances and stuff they had stolen. Man, funerals bring out the worst in people, I guess. But back to the funeral. It was sparsely attended, which surprised me. Jerry's grandmother had been a member of the largest church in the area and had attended it for over 50 years. I expected at least a token showing from the church. I found out later that the church had made a mistake on the announcement card and put the next day's date on it, even though they were hosting the after-funeral lunch, and that was set up and prepared correctly. At the time, I did get a sense of her, but what I got was just older lady, tired, ready to sleep. Sad, a sadness linked to family. At least that was my perception. The funeral and after services went well, and Mary seemed to be coping. My children and husband were exhausted mentally and emotionally, so I suggested we go home for the afternoon and that we would come back later. I would make dinner for everyone and bring it with us. My husband forgot his wallet and had to go back in the house. My daughter was sitting next to me in the car, and I looked over to watch for my husband. And there, standing in the window, plain as day, was Fern, the woman we'd just seen buried. My daughter gasped, and not taking my eyes off the window where the white-haired woman stared back at us, I said, "You see her? Great-grandma's dead, but she's in the window," my daughter said. "I know, sweetie. She's probably just letting us know she's okay, or maybe she just wants to visit with her kids once more before she moves on." "Mom?" my daughter said. I consoled her. "It's okay, honey. Just wave like you used to, and then turn and talk to your brother. It'll be okay." My son Chris shrugged. "I don't see anything, but yeah, come look at my Pokemon Silver." My daughter did, and I watched Fern for a little while longer. She didn't really move, just stood there, like I'd seen her do 100 times before. Then, when my hubby walked out, she turned her head and looked at him as he strode towards us up the walkway, and then she disappeared. Let me explain about this window. It's north-facing, about 4 feet long and 3 feet tall. It has horizontal blinds that are always kept up, and heavy green drapes that are framed inside it. Fern always wore blue, black, or brown. Her hair was bright blue-white and haloed around her face in waves, and she was very clearly visible. 4 feet in front of the window from the outside is the television set, and nothing is allowed to be on top of that TV. Nothing. The glass is untinted, untreated, single-ply glass. It has a clear view in and out, and I could clearly see the family moving around behind the glass, including my husband. But just as clearly, I saw Fern standing there watching our car. She used to do it all the time when we left. It was like she was seeing us out and coming in. I didn't mention it to anyone at the time, but occasionally, over the years, I've seen her standing and watching. I'm not sure why I thought I was the only one to see her, but I did think that, and I was wrong. Not too long ago, when I was dropping off some chicken and dumplings for Mary, one of the new neighbors came over and asked Mary, who was the woman in the window? He'd seen her this afternoon. Mary had been at the doctor's office, which is why I made her supper, and she was all up in arms about some strange woman in her house, and I went in and got Fern's picture and brought it to the new neighbor. I showed it to him and said, "Is this who you saw?" He recognized her immediately. I was at a loss to explain, but Mary said, "Oh, that's Mama. She normally doesn't stop by if I'm not here, but she visits to check on me all the time. You'll see her sometimes, don't worry about it." Mary didn't explain that the visitor was dead, and I didn't know how to explain that the window view wasn't quite what it seemed. On a side note, that doctor's visit was an appointment that led to the discovery of cerebral blockage in her brain. Mary's had 2 very dangerous surgeries since then to remove the blockages. I have to wonder if Fern was there because she knew something serious was happening and wanted to show her support and caring after all. This all happened yesterday, and I'm writing this on my phone from our motel room, so please forgive any grammatical errors. Here we go. Fort Bragg, California is a small beach town northwest of Sacramento. It has kind of a Stephen King feel to it. You know what I mean, that misty, almost eerie small harbor town, but it's beautiful and a huge tourist attraction. You get people from all over the U.S. that travel here. My fiancé and I decided to drive up after I had to take some time off of work due to stress. It was a last-minute decision, and we packed our bags in less than 10 minutes, grabbed our dog, and took off. If we wouldn't have had our dog with us, I'm pretty sure I would have lost her. I guess this is where I tell the story, right? It's our second day here right now, and we are staying at a motel that overlooks the ocean. You can see the fog roll in during the early hours of the morning, and watch the fishing boats leave the harbor to go get their haul for the day. It really is a beautiful thing to see. We woke up early, and I was craving, and I mean craving, bacon and eggs. After getting dressed and deciding what spot to stuff our faces at, we left for our morning adventure. See, here's where I made my mistake. I was driving down the road, and it looked like the stop we crawled up to was a 4-way stop sign. I clearly guessed wrong, because when I pulled out, I cut off a small Ford Ranger. It had a dinky little trailer attached to it, and 2 old men were driving, and I realized a little too late that I had cut them off. They threw up their hands and pointed at me, but Lily didn't even notice it. I just threw my hands up in a, "sorry, I'm just a dipshit tourist" kind of way, and they just stared me down. It was a hillbilly standoff that George Strait would have been proud of. I didn't think much of it. Kept driving down the foggy 2-lane road to get breakfast. I didn't even think to say anything to my fiancée about it. I never thought I'd see those guys again, and I didn't want her to complain about me not knowing how to drive. I was wrong, and I'll never forget what happened next. We got back to the motel after a not-so-great but overly expensive breakfast. We cuddled up and talked about our plans for the wedding, what we wanted to do after the wedding, and midway through our life plans, she realized that we were out of dog food to feed Bruce. I agreed to go up to the cute but creepy market and grabbing a bag of goodies. So I kissed my fiancée on the cheek and jumped in our Navigator and left. I got about halfway to the store before I realized that I had forgotten my wallet on the nightstand. When I pulled back into the parking lot, I saw it. That same fucking Ford Ranger with the janky trailer attached to it. The only difference was that Hank and Boomhauer weren't inside of it. I thought to myself, I don't remember seeing them here last night. I walked up to our door while looking over my shoulder, wondering, what are the chances these douchebags are staying here? And then, not 2 seconds later, my heart started beating faster. Our motel door was open, but barely cracked. It was open slightly to the point where you could see a sliver of light, but nothing more. I slowly pushed it open and looked inside, but I didn't see anything. Lily and Bruce were both gone. It was like they were never really there at all. My heart started racing, and I dropped my keys on the floor and ran outside, heart pounding in my chest faster than a jackhammer. I didn't see the creepy old guys from the Ford truck or my fiancée outside. I was becoming angry and frantic by this point. Fuck, where are you guys? I thought, before the screaming inside my head was cut off by the sound of familiar barking. I heard Bruce barking and I ran faster than I ever have in my entire 28 years of life. I ran straight over to the front office where the sound was coming from, and that's when I saw her and our dog inside the office. My fiancée was crying, sitting on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, and the dog's hair was standing straight up until he saw that it was me sprinting towards them. Lily got up and ran into my arms. Meanwhile, the clerk was on the phone, and I'm wondering, what the fuck happened in the 2 minutes I was gone? And this is what happened told by my fiancée, and it makes my blood run cold. It turns out, as soon as I left, not 30 seconds went by, and those fucking guys knocked on the door. Lily opened it, thinking it was me forgetting something, and they tried to force their way into the room, and one of them said, "You can thank your boy toy for what's coming to you." Then they grabbed her and covered her mouth, but those assholes didn't realize one thing, and that was that we had a dog in the back seat when I cut them off. Bruce jumped off the bed and didn't hesitate to bite the one grabbing her, and they kicked him and tried to shake him off, but he wouldn't let go. After being bit and realizing that the noise would draw attention if they didn't leave, they ran off, and Lily was able to run to the front office and wait for help, and Bruce followed suit. I wasn't there. I couldn't protect her, and if we would have found a dog sitter, Lily would be gone right now. But my dog was there, and he did exactly what a good boy, no, the best boy would do. And for that, he is truly my best friend. If he wasn't there, what would have happened? Would she have been kidnapped, beaten, killed, all of the above? The craziest thing is that they haven't been caught yet. We filed all the reports with the local sheriff, and I told them what had happened earlier that morning, and the cop looked right at me and said, "You're lucky your dog was there. If he wasn't, and they got in with her, you could have been filling out a very different report right now." I got tears in my eyes at that, and I looked over at Lily and Bruce and thanked God that I rescued him from the pound, because in return, he rescued the love of my life when I couldn't. So, dudes from the Hills Have Eyes and Deliverance, let's meet. But this time, I'm going to be the one grabbing you, and trust me, I'm not going to let you get away this time. Bruce is getting a steak dinner tomorrow night, and all the treats he could ever want. My daughter was about 10 months old when her dad moved in with us. We had decided to give it another try, and I had my reservations at first. The last 4 months of my pregnancy and the first 9 months of my daughter's life, he had been absent. Even though I had gone through a lot of hardship on my own, I was young and in love, so I figured, why not? At first, it was not easy for either one of us, and we still fought over every little thing. But we were both trying, and we would eventually talk about how each of us had reacted and what we could do to stop fighting. A couple of weeks after he moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night and realized he wasn't in bed. I stayed awake for a few minutes and he hadn't come back, and I also didn't see that the restroom light was on. I got up, went out to the hallway living room area, and saw that he was standing with the drapes slightly open, peeking out the window. When I called out to him, he turned and had his fingers to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. I got scared and stood frozen in place. He walked back to me and nudged me back into the bedroom. I asked him what was going on, and he said that there was someone out there trying to get in. He said, "She wants to take that baby." I panicked and told him we needed to call the police, but he insisted that, no, she's gone already. I kept asking who it was. How did he know she wanted to take the baby? Why don't you want to call the police? I relaxed a little when he said, "I just know." Then I figured he had a bad dream or was sleepwalking, so I told him to lie down and go back to sleep. A couple of nights later, the same thing. I would ask him about it in the morning the next day, and he would remember everything, and he would say that he couldn't sleep, that he had a feeling someone wanted to take the baby. I chalked it up to him having anxiety over being a new dad, and I even thought he was on something, but he was a health freak and had never even tasted beer. He had been staying with us now for maybe 6 weeks when we were awoken by my daughter screaming at the top of her lungs. This was unusual. My daughter slept through the night, and this was not crying, this was screaming. So we bolted out of bed and ran to her bedroom, only to find that the door wouldn't open. Her dad was trying to force the door open while I wrung my hands in full panic mode. And finally her dad ran to the kitchen to get a knife to try to open the door while I stood there talking to my baby to get her to calm down. When her dad came back, before even trying the knife, he turned the knob and guess what? The door opened. And we were freaking out. We had never even closed the door to her bedroom at night, much less lock it. After that incident, we always made sure we blocked the door with a trash can so it wouldn't close. And this was also the beginning of her night terrors. She did not like being in the apartment, and she would constantly jump at every noise and would follow me even to the restroom. She stopped sleeping in her bedroom, and she would cry bloody murder if we tried putting her down to sleep in there. She was sleeping in our room now, and a few times while getting ready for bed, the bedroom door would slam, and there were no open windows, no AC or even a fan. Picture frames would fall from the wall, and perfume bottles were constantly knocked over. Once, in the kitchen, while she was sitting in her baby chair, a fork came flying out of nowhere and barely missed hitting her. Sometimes she would be staring at something and would look frightened, and then she would turn her back against the wall, shut her eyes, and start crying. The weird thing is that she wasn't like that when she was at my parents' house. There, she was a happy baby. Her pediatrician said they were probably night terrors and didn't offer any quick solution. My mother took her to see a Mexican brujo, or witch. My mom told me that he practically just massaged her head and burned some plants or weeds while he did some praying. He told my mom that something very evil was trying to attach to our daughter, and he advised that we get her out of there. My daughter was now staying with my parents. Her dad and I would spend most of our nights there too, just so we could be with her. And frankly, we were scared of the apartment. Well, we had a lease and couldn't get out of it, so we kept paying rent, but we were rarely there. One day, I was at a park with my daughter and brought her a big helium balloon, one that had arms and legs out of paper that would swing around. On my way back to my parents', I stopped by the apartment to get something, and I didn't want to leave her alone in the car, so we both went in. I left her in the living room holding her balloon and told her I would be right out. I was getting some stuff into a duffel bag when I heard her start screaming and crying. I ran out and saw that the balloon, instead of being stuck to the ceiling like it should have been when not being held by the string, was chasing her around the coffee table. I picked her up and was kicking the balloon that kept sticking to my legs, and the stupid thing just kept coming back. Meanwhile, my baby was hysterical and clinging to me for dear life, so I grabbed my keys and purse and ran out of there with her. As I was locking the door from the outside with my keys, I very clearly heard laughter coming from inside. I arrived at my parents' house still shaking and crying, and my dad kept explaining something about static and why the balloon was sticking to us. I get it. But nothing explains the laughter, or the fact that the balloon was full of helium and should not have been gliding a few feet from the ground. It should have been on the ceiling. That was the last day either one of us stepped foot in that apartment. My soon-to-be husband at that time, his sister, and his brother-in-law packed up all of our stuff and moved everything out. My daughter is all grown up now, and even though she remembers many things from her childhood, she does not remember that apartment. She has had nightmares that she tells me about and describes the layout of the apartment, though. Maybe it was a spirit that did not appreciate her dad moving in with us, but why torment my baby and not him? Just reliving all this makes my heart race, and I'm actually shaking right now as I type. I've had many incidents involving spirits in my parents' house in Mexico, but none have really scared me like this. I live in California now, but spend the weekends in the house in Mexico. My mom moved out of the house and now lives in Nevada, so we have a close friend of the family living there with her children. They have told me of some unusual activity going on right now, and I'm getting ready to do a house cleansing. I'll let you all know how that turns out. This all happened yesterday, and I'm writing this on my phone from our motel room, so please forgive any grammatical errors. Here we go. Fort Bragg, California is a small beach town northwest of Sacramento. It has kind of a Stephen King feel to it. You know what I mean, that misty, almost eerie small harbor town, but it's beautiful and a huge tourist attraction. You get people from all over the U.S. that travel here. My fiancé and I decided to drive up after I had to take some time off of work due to stress. It was a last-minute decision, and we packed our bags in less than 10 minutes, grabbed our dog, and took off. If we wouldn't have had our dog with us, I'm pretty sure I would have lost her. I guess this is where I tell the story, right? It's our second day here right now, and we are staying in a motel that overlooks the ocean. You can see the fog roll in during the early hours of the morning, and watch the fishing boats leave the harbor to go get their haul for the day. It really is a beautiful thing to see. We woke up early, and I was craving, and I mean craving, bacon and eggs. After getting dressed and deciding what spot to stuff our faces at, we left for our morning adventure. See, here's where I made my mistake. I was driving down the road, and it looked like the stop we crawled up to was a four-way stop sign. I clearly guessed wrong, because when I pulled out, I cut off a small Ford Ranger. It had a dinky little trailer attached to it, and two old men were driving, and I realized a little too late that I had cut them off. They threw up their hands and pointed at me, but Lily didn't even notice it. I just threw my hands up in a, sorry, I'm just a dipshit tourist kind of way, and they just stared me down. It was a hillbilly standoff that George Strait would have been proud of. I didn't think much of it. Kept driving down the foggy two-lane road to get breakfast. I didn't even think to say anything to my fiancée about it. I never thought I'd see those guys again, and I didn't want her to complain about me not knowing how to drive. I was wrong, and I'll never forget what happened next. We got back to the motel after a not-so-great but overly expensive breakfast. We cuddled up and talked about our plans for the wedding, and what we wanted to do after the wedding. And midway through our life plans, she realized that we were out of dog food to feed Bruce. I agreed to go up to the cute but creepy market and grabbing a bag of goodies. So I kissed my fiancée on the cheek and jumped in our Navigator. And left. I got about halfway to the store before I realized that I had forgotten my wallet on the nightstand. When I pulled back into the parking lot, I saw it. That same fucking Ford Ranger with the janky trailer attached to it. The only difference was that Hank and Boomhauer weren't inside of it. I thought to myself, I don't remember seeing them here last night. I walked up to our door while looking over my shoulder wondering, what are the chances these douchebags are staying here? And then, not 2 seconds later, my heart started beating faster. Our motel door was open, but barely cracked. It was open slightly to the point where you could see a sliver of light, but nothing more. I slowly pushed it open and looked inside, but I didn't see anything. Lily and Bruce were both gone. It was like they were never really there at all. My heart started racing, and I dropped my keys on the floor and ran outside, heart pounding in my chest faster than a jackhammer. I didn't see the creepy old guys from the Ford truck or my fiancée outside. I was becoming angry and frantic by this point. Fuck, where are you guys? I thought, before the screaming inside my head was cut off by the sound of familiar barking. I heard Bruce barking and I ran faster than I ever have in my entire 28 years of life. I ran straight over to the front office where the sound was coming from, and that's when I saw her and our dog inside the office. My fiancé was crying, sitting on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, and the dog's hair was standing straight up until he saw that it was me sprinting towards them. Lily got up and ran into my arms. Meanwhile, the clerk was on the phone, and I'm wondering, what the fuck happened in the 2 minutes I was gone? And this is what happened told by my fiancé, and it makes my blood run cold. It turns out as soon as I left, not 30 seconds went by, and those fucking guys knocked on the door. Lily opened it, thinking it was me forgetting something, and they tried to force their way into the room, and one of them said,
"You can thank your boy toy for what's coming to you."
Then they grabbed her and covered her mouth, but those assholes didn't realize one thing, and that was that we had a dog in the back seat when I cut them off. Bruce jumped off the bed and didn't hesitate to bite the one grabbing her, and they kicked him and tried to shake him off, but he wouldn't let go. After being bit and realizing that the noise would draw attention if they didn't leave, they ran off, and Lily was able to run to the front office and wait for help, and Bruce followed suit. I wasn't there. I couldn't protect her, and if we would have found a dog sitter, Lily would be gone right now. But my dog was there, and he did exactly what a good boy, no, the best boy would do. And for that, he is truly my best friend. If he wasn't there, what would have happened? Would she have been kidnapped, beaten, killed, all of the above? The craziest thing is that they haven't been caught yet. We filed all the reports with the local sheriff, and I told them what had happened earlier that morning, and the cop looked right at me and said, "You're lucky your dog was there. If he wasn't, and they got in with her, you could have been filling out a very different report right now." I got tears in my eyes at that, and I looked over at Lily and Bruce and thanked God that I rescued him from the pound, because in return, he rescued the love of my life when I couldn't. So, dudes from the hills have eyes and deliverance? Let's meet. But this time, I'm going to be the one grabbing you, and trust me, I'm not going to let you get away this time. Bruce is getting a steak dinner tomorrow night, and all the treats he could ever want. My daughter was about 10 months old when her dad moved in with us. We had decided to give it another try, and I had my reservations at first. The last 4 months of my pregnancy and the first 9 months of my daughter's life, he had been absent. Even though I had gone through a lot of hardship on my own, I was young and in love, so I figured why not? At first, it was not easy for either one of us, and we still fought over every little thing. But we were both trying, and we would eventually talk about how each of us had reacted and what we could do to stop fighting. A couple of weeks after he moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night and realized he wasn't in bed. I stayed awake for a few minutes and he hadn't come back, and I also didn't see that the restroom light was on. I got up, went out to the hallway living room area, and saw that he was standing with the drapes slightly open, peeking out the window. When I called out to him, he turned and had his fingers to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. I got scared and stood frozen in place. He walked back to me and nudged me back into the bedroom. I asked him what was going on, and he said that there was someone out there trying to get in. He said, "She wants to take that baby." I panicked and told him we needed to call the police, but he insisted that, no, she's gone already. I kept asking who it was. How did he know she wanted to take the baby? Why don't you want to call the police? I relaxed a little when he said, "I just know." Then I figured he had a bad dream or was sleepwalking, so I told him to lie down and go back to sleep. A couple of nights later, the same thing. I would ask him about it in the morning the next day, and he would remember everything, and he would say that he couldn't sleep, that he had a feeling someone wanted to take the baby. I chalked it up to him having anxiety over being a new dad, and I even thought he was on something, but he was a health freak and had never even tasted beer. He had been staying with us now for maybe 6 weeks when we were awoken by my daughter screaming at the top of her lungs. This was unusual. My daughter slept through the night, and this was not crying, this was screaming. So we bolted out of bed and ran to her bedroom, only to find that the door wouldn't open. Her dad was trying to force the door open while I wrung my hands in full panic mode. And finally her dad ran to the kitchen to get a knife to try to open the door while I stood there talking to my baby to get her to calm down. When her dad came back, before even trying the knife, he turned the knob and guess what? The door opened. And we were freaking out. We had never even closed the door to her bedroom at night, much less lock it. After that incident, we always made sure we blocked the door with a trash can so it wouldn't close. And this was also the beginning of her night terrors. She did not like being in the apartment, and she would constantly jump at every noise and would follow me even to the restroom. She stopped sleeping in her bedroom, and she would cry bloody murder if we tried putting her down to sleep in there. She was sleeping in our room now, and a few times while getting ready for bed, the bedroom door would slam, and there were no open windows, no AC or even a fan. Picture frames would fall from the wall, and perfume bottles were constantly knocked over. Once, in the kitchen, while she was sitting in her baby chair, a fork came flying out of nowhere and barely missed hitting her. Sometimes she would be staring at something and would look frightened, and then she would turn her back against the wall, shut her eyes, and start crying. The weird thing is that she wasn't like that when she was at my parents' house. There, she was a happy baby. Her pediatrician said they were probably night terrors and didn't offer any quick solution. My mother took her to see a Mexican brujo, or witch. My mom told me that he practically just massaged her head and burned some plants or weeds while he did some praying. He told my mom that something very evil was trying to attach to our daughter, and he advised that we get her out of there. My daughter was now staying with my parents. Her dad and I would spend most of our nights there too, just so we could be with her. And frankly, we were scared of the apartment. Well, we had a lease and couldn't get out of it, so we kept paying rent, but we were rarely there. One day, I was at a park with my daughter and brought her a big helium balloon, one that had arms and legs out of paper that would swing around. On my way back to my parents', I stopped by the apartment to get something, and I didn't want to leave her alone in the car, so we both went in. I left her in the living room holding her balloon and told her I would be right out. I was getting some stuff into a duffel bag when I heard her start screaming and crying. I ran out and saw that the balloon, instead of being stuck to the ceiling like it should have been when not being held by the string, was chasing her around the coffee table. I picked her up and was kicking the balloon that kept sticking to my legs, and the stupid thing just kept coming back. Meanwhile, my baby was hysterical and clinging to me for dear life, so I grabbed my keys and purse and ran out of there with her. As I was locking the door from the outside with my keys, I very clearly heard laughter coming from inside. I arrived at my parents' house still shaking and crying, and my dad kept explaining something about static and why the balloon was sticking to us. I get it, but nothing explains the laughter, or the fact that the balloon was full of helium and should not have been gliding a few feet from the ground. It should have been on the ceiling. That was the last day either one of us stepped foot in that apartment. My soon-to-be husband at that time, his sister, and his brother-in-law packed up all of our stuff and moved everything out. My daughter is all grown up now, and even though she remembers many things from her childhood, she does not remember that apartment. She has had nightmares that she tells me about and describes the layout of the apartment, though. Maybe it was a spirit that did not appreciate her dad moving in with us, but why torment my baby and not him? Just reliving all this makes my heart race, and I'm actually shaking right now as I type. I've had many incidents involving spirits in my parents' house in Mexico, but none have really scared me like this. I live in California now, but spend the weekends in the house in Mexico. My mom moved out of the house and now lives in Nevada, so we have a close friend of the family living there with her children. They have told me of some unusual activity going on right now, and I'm getting ready to do a house cleansing. I'll let you all know how that turns out. This is a little long, so I apologize, but I've never written this out before and never will again, so I figured I might as well tell the whole thing for myself, if no one else. First off, this is the only creepy, scary-ish thing that has ever happened to me in my life, which is probably why it stands out so much in my memory. In hindsight, the location and general isolation probably made it seem much scarier than it was, but at the time, it felt like I'd stumbled into the opening scenes of a full-on horror film. Anyway, here's the story. So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for the free rent and food for 9 months or so before I was leaving the state for graduate school. My parents are super chill and gave me my own space in the house, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at a house in the sticks, and they had just recently moved about 40 miles south of a major Midwest city, it certainly was not ideal, but I didn't have any other options. So I started looking for some work, more to pass the time than to save up some money. Anyway, summer turned to winter, and I still hadn't found anything solid, but by then I desperately needed to spend more time out of my parents' house, so I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner guy that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it since it didn't pay much, and it was short-term, and wasn't even really an office setup, but again, since my parents lived in the middle of nowhere Midwest, think acres and acres of farms, I knew I had limited local opportunities to make some cash, and this guy was going to pay me under the table as well. About that same time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I just paid him $200 a month and helped clean up, he'd basically let me crash in his living room until I was ready to move out of state. That was all I needed to hear. I took the job. So my dad's friend's family had a construction-type business. They helped out with building stuff a little, but it was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large augers they owned. Also other various drills and odds and ends like generators and other low-level construction or farming equipment that someone in the area couldn't afford to purchase but needed to use from time to time. This was a small mom-and-pop type thing where everyone knew everyone, and the office only opened on days when someone was coming by. It was just generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owners and the locals. Since I had minored in a business-adjacent area and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go there for about 15 to 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment date if there was a payment plan in place, answer an email or two, discussing prices with customers and availability, etc. Super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about, 90 years old, and at the top of this little hill. And the downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s when this family bought it cheap, cleared out the bar, and fenced in the property to use its parking lot area to store all their rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased, work any hours I wanted to as long as the work got done, and if things were slow and there weren't any rentals for a couple of days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay until around midnight or 1, since I knew that I'd be alone and could listen to music loud and take my time and all that. The office where I worked was on the second floor of the building, above the old bar, and it looked out onto the long driveway. From my seat, I could easily see out the window, and once or twice saw a family of deer or raccoons scamper by, and I always glanced out when I saw movement since it was very noticeable. The place was incredibly remote, very still and quiet, so if something unusual occurred or if something felt off, I definitely noticed it. One night during winter, it had snowed a few inches, and my dad told me to stay in because the roads were bad. But I had an old SUV, and more than that, just really wanted to get out of the house. So I went into work at about 8 p.m. and was going to stay until just after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill, since believe me when I say that no one ever showed up at night, since we were literally in the middle of nowhere. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and to even turn into our short road, you had to only be coming to our specific building and probably know it was there beforehand. It was a local-only type thing. Very small, since the family had inherited a lot of money, we're pretty sure, and kind of did this rental thing on the side. Basically, someone would never just get lost and end up at our building. So I'm jamming away to some Fall Out Boy. Yeah, everyone makes mistakes when they're young. And I was having some coffee and kept glancing out at the snow outside here and there, since one of our garage's streetlights reflected onto the ground at the gate, and it was causing the light to shine off the snow in a really cool, dare I say pretty way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom to do my bathroom business, and then came back upstairs and got settled back into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work when I glanced outside and saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the light. It seemed like it must have been a huge dog or substantial animal had just rolled around on the ground there on its back or something like that. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened while I was in the bathroom, or maybe when my back was turned, since I would have seen that type of movement for sure. I shook it off and assumed that a dog or maybe even a farm animal had gotten loose and maybe was attracted to the light or something. Who knows? And this was common. It was that type of area. At around 2 in the morning I was leaving, and as always, got out of my car to lock up the gate, and to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow. But when I looked down, I was shocked to see that it wasn't just something that disturbed snow. It was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when kids lie on their back in the snow and push their arms and legs back and forth, so when they get up, it looks like the outline of an angel. Hey, I used to do that when I was a kid, so I 100% knew for sure that that's what this was, and it was deliberately made underneath the light post. But it wasn't from a kid. It was from a very large person, or at the very least, a normal-sized adult wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I looked up and saw what I already knew, that whoever had made this snow angel could easily look up and have seen me through that window, so they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make this angel. Now, I definitely would have seen or heard if someone had drove up to our building, even if I was in the bathroom. So I knew someone had to have walked deep into the freezing cold and snow for a few miles, stopped in front of our building, and then do a snow angel in the small amount of time I wasn't sitting in front of my desk. I glanced around for tracks in the snow and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building. So it was clear the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely a little freaked out now once I realized that someone had just been this close to me secretly in the middle of the woods, and I looked around but didn't see anything amiss at all, and now just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I got back in my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss would be there in like 4 hours and might see the snow angel and assume I did it, since he probably assumed I kept the gate locked while I was there. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all, but I was young and felt like I might be made fun of by him, if nothing else. So I opened the gate back up real quick, ran over and kicked the snow around so it hid the angel. I locked it up again and went back to my car. I should note that this is what really happened at this moment, but I almost lied here and said something else since it seems fake, since I assumed the average person wouldn't get back out of their SUV and not just flee in their car because they'd be embarrassed about a snow angel. But at that time, I was insecure and cared a lot about what others thought. So unfortunately, this is what I did. Also, I wasn't exactly fully terrified at this point, even though it was certainly unsettling. I just thought it was really weird and could have been an illegal hunter, even though hunting at night in the cold didn't make much sense. Either way, the imprint was made 2 hours earlier, and I assumed they were long gone. But that's when I heard it. While I was getting into my SUV, there was the loudest high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the witch in The Wizard of Oz or something, like someone was doing it fake on purpose to show they weren't scared of me, or to see how I'd react at all once I knew they were there laughing at me on this property. It was close enough that I knew they could probably see me, but I couldn't see them at all since, other than the streetlight I was under, There was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped, and then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for just like 5 seconds, listening in a panic. Now, I spend a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, so I can't completely logically rule that out. But to me, it honestly felt like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing, like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it fucking worked. After that 5 seconds, I immediately filled with adrenaline, got in my car, and drove the hell away from there as fast as I could without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure it out and told my parents the story when they woke up. After talking it out, we all decided it was one of two things. It was either my brain somehow convinced itself the snow formation was angel-shaped, when it was really just caused by some animal, and then the snow tracks and laughing were just a coyote or red fox. Though I don't think that's what it was. What I truly believe, the second thing, is that some local was out walking around for some reason and decided to mess with me. I didn't have any close friends in that area that would do this, and if they did, they would have certainly brought it up to make fun of me for speeding away in terror. I found out later that the nearest house was a super old couple, so I highly doubt that it was one of them, which means whoever it was went out in the woods in the night in the freezing cold just to mess with a stranger. I don't have any mental issues or a family history of them. I didn't do drugs. I drank socially at that time, but certainly didn't that night. I also don't believe in the paranormal, so I never once gave that a thought. In my heart, I know someone was out there. I worked there another 6 weeks or so and never had a single issue, though I knew where my boss kept his gun, and I always made sure it was there when I started my shift, and I certainly always locked the gate from then on. Thinking about this experience that night, the part that freaked me out the most was that he had to have waited around for me to leave for about 2 hours just to do that laugh. He didn't know me. I could have been crazy and the type of person to get mad and try to find him and attack him. Yet, he didn't seem scared or to care at all when he tried to mess with me. For some random dude, this is probably a story he tells from his point of view to make all of his friends giggle hysterically. But for me, that dude, the one I call the angel in the snow guy, the one with the laugh I'll never forget, let's not meet. A friend and I went driving to camp in Oregon on Highway 199 in the fall of 1985. We didn't want to stay at a pay site, so we pulled off onto a side spur road in dense forest and set up a tent. We had our 2 Malamute cross dogs with us who had been by our sides in many backcountry adventures before. As we set up our sleeping bags in the tent, the dogs began growling very menacingly with their hair up full on their backs. We thought there might have been a bear around and worried that they would take off after it and it'd be difficult to catch. So we left them outside anyway and crawled into our bags to sleep. Then, the dogs began whimpering and trying to claw their way into the tent. We nervously let them in, and not long afterwards, we began to hear howling. First, just like one voice, but then followed by many voices. I would estimate that the sounds came from about 100 yards away. It was reminiscent of hearing a coyote pack or wolf pack, but these were not canine voices. They ranged in pitch from childlike to adult male and higher female voices. It sounded like a really loud frat party in the middle of nowhere on a stormy, blustery night in the dark. It sounded like people were talking very loud, yet howling at the same time. And I've had many other experiences hearing coyote packs, and that is not what we heard. I have no further explanation for what it was, and we just braved it out through the night, and then got the heck out of there in the morning. The second experience I had was at the Avenue of the Giants. It was with the same friend while we were hiking a trail there. It was again in the fall of '85, about a month later than the first encounter. We had a map with us and decided to cut a loop short by going cross-country through the dense redwood forest. Not long after we got started, the dog we had with us, one of the same dogs we had before, lunged out full on his leash and began dragging my friend up a steep incline. We reached the top and noticed large, foot-shaped impressions, maybe 14 to 18 inches long and like 8 inches wide. They were all in the duff below. Above us on the length of ground the dog had drug us through, branches were snapped off clean up 10 feet high on the trees, and we made our way back to the main trail with no further incident. The most striking thing was the odd behavior of the dogs. Anyone who has owned a Malamute knows they are very bold, and that they basically aren't afraid of anything, especially when there's more than one of them. When the dogs near the Oregon experience tried to claw their way into the tent, it sent shivers up my spine, and I gotta say I didn't get much sleep that night. Again, with the incident at Richardson Grove, the dog actually stood up on its hind legs and walked while lunging forward up a steep bank, dragging my friend who weighed about 170 pounds with him in pursuit of this thing that had left big footprints in the duff. Never had that dog do that before or since, in spite of many wilderness adventures, encounters with bear, elk, deer, or etc. The first incident again was about late October 1985. The second was early December of that same year. This is absolutely a true story, and a little long, so bear with me. There was an old abandoned warehouse in my old hometown that was well known to be supposedly haunted. There were numerous origin stories floating around as to why it was haunted, and one was that the old owner employed slaves to work his field, and one day he just went crazy and started hanging them all from the rafters. Another was that a group of teenagers were playing a game of D&D upstairs, and one kid just went off the rails and drove an axe through another player's skull. Regardless of what really happened there were always weird fucking things going on in that place. On one occasion, me and some friends went to check it out at night, and in the middle of the main room, there was a dead dog on the ground with a stick shoved straight through its stomach. Now back, we found the skeletal remains of a cat, but someone had attached bird wings to it. As we headed back inside, all of a sudden it started raining inside the building. I mean, not a mist or something that could come from a sprinkler system at all. It was legit raining hard inside this place, and this was on a really clear night with no clouds in the sky, and not one drop of rain outside the place. It didn't make sense for any of this to be happening. Then we heard what sounded like human whimpers coming from the upstairs area, so we called out to see if someone needed help. But the whimpers stopped, only to turn into what sounded like a little girl giggling. We hightailed it out of there right then and there. Later, me and my best friend finally got our nerve to go back to this place about a month later, but this time we went in the daylight. We did bring flashlights because it was pitch black in the main area, and we didn't want to trip over anything. We noticed that the dead dog that had been there before was gone this time, so someone must have moved it. We made our way up a few small stairs that led to a big loading dock type of room. We had our flashlights scanning the floor just to make sure nothing was there, and we didn't find anything interesting. From where we were standing, there was a big metal staircase in front of us that led up to a catwalk about 25 feet high, which gave us a full view of the room from where we were standing below it. I started scanning my light from left to right to see if anything was up there, and I noticed a few boxed crates and a barrel of some sort. But then, all of a sudden, I noticed the reflection of eyes gleaming back at me. I told my friend that something was up there, and he put his flashlight to where mine was, and with both of our lights shining on this thing, we could finally see what it was. And to this day, I still can't explain what the hell we saw. It looked to be about 3 or 4 feet tall, covered in hair and walking upright like a human. In the moment, I made a quick joke out of fear to lighten the mood and said, "What the fuck? That thing looks like Alf, man." and my friend also chuckled nervously. We watched as this thing paced back and forth up on the catwalk for about a minute. It made no sound at all and just walked to the left, and then it would stop, and then turn around and walk to the right. We were completely captivated by whatever this thing was. And suddenly, it turned sharply and glared directly at us. Its eyes stared directly into our lights, and it cocked its head to the side as if it was studying us. Then, in a quick flash, it darted towards the big metal staircase that would lead down to where we were. We panicked and ran as fast as we could, while behind us we heard the echoes of each footstep hitting each step of that staircase. As we reached the exit, we both heard a deep booming laugh that literally shook the whole building. We jumped into our car, locked the doors, and stared back at the doorway we had just escaped from, expecting to see that creature there, waiting. But there was nothing. I still have no explanation for what we experienced that day, and we vowed that we'd never go back to that place. This happened 15 years ago, and I still find myself picturing that thing's face when I close my eyes at night, and it still scares the hell out of me to this day. I have a problem with night terrors and sleep paralysis. Keep in mind that for most of my life, I never knew about night terrors or sleep paralysis, and only recently learned about them within the last few years. I thought I was cursed or haunted, even possessed, for a good chunk of my younger years. The first time I really remember having one, I was asleep in the house I grew up in. That house has its own creepy stories I might tell some other time. I was in the bottom bunk bed. I jolted awake, but I couldn't move, and this puppet-looking thing, like the mean lady puppet from Mr. Rogers, but wrong, just very, 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 very wrong, popped up on the side of the bed and was just there taunting me and scaring me. And I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, I couldn't do anything. I had them again on and off for years, mostly when I've stayed up too late or am stressed out. I remember another such time vividly, maybe 15 years later. I had the night terror and that inability to move, and the feeling that there was something that was about to kill me right then and there. I was much older, a freshman in college, home for Thanksgiving, but not the house I grew up in. My parents had divorced my senior year of high school, and my mother had sold the house while I was away during fall term. Anyway, I had fallen asleep late. Again, I woke up, but couldn't move. I started panicking, but this time, instead of waking up the rest of the way as usual and being unable to sleep for a good long time, something else happened. I managed to calm down, but stay in my dream. I was walking through this new house, down the hall, and I opened a door, and I was in a completely different place. It was very ornate, very gothic looking, but the stone quickly gave way to dripping flesh and bone as I progressed through the building. Demonic imps were skittering about, and a very large horned demon was all of a sudden headed my way. I ran, but could only find myself in a maze surrounded by these crazy noises from hell. Finally, I really panicked, and I heard laughter, just this vicious laughter. In response, I started reciting the Lord's Prayer. All the noise stopped, and all I could hear was my voice echoing through the halls, saying the Lord's Prayer over and over, almost like a round. Our Father who art in heaven, repeating and mixing with the rest of the prayer, echoing deafeningly. That's when I finally woke up, and I didn't have another one for about a year. If I felt like I was slipping into one, I'd say the Lord's Prayer and manage to avoid it. The next one I had was really bad, probably the worst I'd ever had. I felt that typical presence there with me, but it was different this time. I mean, horribly different. I felt like death was there to take me. I felt like I was literally dying, not just scared, but about to die. I mean, I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, and I imagined my heart was about to burst in absolute fear and just kill me. But it finally passed, and I went another few months without one. Unfortunately, whatever is wired weird in my brain is not forgiving in the least. The next major one I had, I was dating the woman that is now my wife. We'd been together for a few weeks and had fallen asleep, and as I turned over, I opened my eyes and her back was to me. but in the middle of her back was just a hole, black with these smoky tendrils crawling out of it. And all of a sudden, the tendrils go taut, like they're straining to pull, and a face leaps out of the hole in her back, screaming at me, and I screamed in return and pushed her away. She asked me what the fuck had happened, and I explained the problem I have with sleep sometimes. She understood, and to this day, she usually manages to wake me up from them. Usually, but not always. A few years back, my then boyfriend and I took a short trip to Las Vegas. We stayed at this hotel, which I won't mention here, but it was a pretty popular hotel right on the strip. As soon as we got into the room, I went to turn on the AC. I always like a hotel room to be at a very cool temperature. After we unpacked, we went down and grabbed some food and drinks and did some gambling before heading back to our room. We got ready for bed, turned off the lights, and I suddenly heard or felt something weird. It was within seconds my boyfriend sat straight up and screamed. I didn't think he was already asleep yet because we had just barely laid down. So I asked him what was the matter, and he mumbled that he just had a bad dream. I thought that was weird because, like I said, how could he have been asleep already within 10 seconds of going to bed? I let it go, and it took me about 20 minutes before I fell asleep. And I think it was not long after I did fall asleep, I started sweating. It felt super warm in the room, and that totally woke me up. I went to crank up the AC, and then went back to bed. But after a while, I felt super cold, and I got up to turn the AC down. And to make the story shorter, the room temperature kept changing the whole night, and I barely got 2 hours of sleep. I didn't feel well at all, and I felt like something was present in that room's balcony. So the next morning we got up, went to grab a bite to eat, and shopped a little, and then headed back to the room to freshen up. Let me set the scenario here for you. The room was just like any other standard hotel room, with a TV and a cabinet in front of the bed, and there were 2 chairs on either side of the cabinet. My then boyfriend was sitting on the chair on the right side of the cabinet while I was sitting on the bed watching TV. I think it was around 6 in the evening, and I was just surfing the channels to see what was on. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something standing on the left side of the TV cabinet. And at first, I really didn't think there was actually something there, so I rubbed my eyes a little and pretended to not be looking. You know, we all have peripheral vision, so even when I was staring straight at the TV, I could see that something from the corner of my eye, and what I saw was a little boy standing there. He was not in a very clear form, but I knew it was a little boy. I was so scared at that moment, I said to my then boyfriend, "We have to leave." He said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Don't ask. We have to change rooms." So I got up, went to the phone, and called down to the reception's desk. I told the person that I needed to change rooms right away, and he asked me if something was wrong. I told him, "There is something in this room," and right after I said that, the TV shut down and made a super loud sound like an explosion. I mean, my boyfriend jumped up, and the person on the phone asked if we needed help with our luggage. I said no, we just needed to get out. We ran out of the room and down to the hotel lobby, and I asked the person that was helping us if she had ever had another complaint that there was something weird in that room. And the person said that she didn't know of anything, but there are so many staff, she wouldn't really know. We had someone come up to our room with us to see us pack and move to a new room. It was after we were there in the new room that my then boyfriend told me what really happened the night before. He said he didn't want to scare me, and that's why he didn't say anything. He told me that after he had laid down to bed, something came flying right at him from the balcony, so he jumped up and screamed. He said whatever it was on top of him, and he felt paralyzed. It couldn't have been a dream either, because like I said, it was within 10 seconds after he laid down. I told him that the whole night, whatever it was playing with the AC, and we both agreed that it was a little boy's spirit, and he was not very nice. He wanted us out of that room for some reason, and still, today, I can remember what it looked like. He was not actually standing on the ground. He was very much in human form, and yet you still know that he's not while you're seeing it. To this day, whenever I think about it, I still get goosebumps.